Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a figure shrouded in mystery, a philosopher who's like a puzzle box of ancient wisdom.
I like that. A puzzle box.
We're talking about Leucippus,
Ah.
a thinker who's so elusive, some even question if he actually existed.
It's true. Some scholars believe he might be a pseudonym for his more famous student, Democritus.
A pseudonym. That's wild. Talk about a deep dive starting with a mystery.
Exactly. And that makes piecing together his story even more intriguing.
But even with the limited fragments we have, what we do know about Leucippus is seriously mind-blowing.
Totally agree.
This guy, way back in the 5th century BC, came up with a theory that's still relevant today. Atomism.
Oh, it's a game changer.
So for those who haven't encountered atomism before, what's the basic idea here?
Imagine everything around you, everything you can see and touch, even yourself, is made up of these tiny, indivisible particles.
Like the tiniest little building blocks?
Exactly. And these building blocks, these particles, are called atoms. And they're constantly moving around in empty space, which Leucippus called the void.
So it's kind of like everything is made of Legos, but way smaller, and they're constantly bouncing around.
That's a great analogy. It really captures the essence of atomism.
I like it. But back then, this idea was revolutionary, right?
Oh, absolutely. It went against the grain of the prevailing philosophy at the time, which was led by guys like Parmenides.
Right, Parmenides.
He and his followers believed in the oneness of being, no change, no nothingness.
So they thought the world was just one big static thing.
Exactly, like a frozen picture.
And then Leucippus comes along and says, hold on, I have a different perspective.
Pretty much. He challenged their core beliefs.
What was his main argument against this oneness of being idea?
He used their own logic against them. Parmenides argued that nothingness can't exist, right? So Leucippus applied that to the void itself.
Oh, clever.
He said, even the space between atoms, the void, is indivisible. It can't be broken down further.
So by making the void indivisible, he kind of sidestepped their argument about nothingness.
Exactly, and that opened the door for motion and change to be possible.
That's some serious philosophical judo.
I know, right?
So how did he then apply this idea of atoms and void to the universe as a whole? How did he picture the cosmos working?
Imagine a giant cosmic snow globe constantly being shaken, with the atoms being the snowflakes.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Leucippus envisioned this swirling vortex of atoms, bumping into each other, sorting themselves by size and shape. That's how he explained the formation of the Earth, celestial bodies, even other worlds.
Wait, other worlds? Is this guy the original multiverse theorist?
You got it. He believed in an infinite number of atoms and infinite void, so he figured, why not infinite worlds forming out there?
That's amazing. But keep in mind, this is still ancient Greece.
Right?
So while his big ideas were radical, some of his specific explanations were, well, let's just say, a product of his time.
True enough.
Yeah.
Meaning he believed in a flat, tilted Earth.
The classic flat Earth.
But here's what I find fascinating. Even though his model of the Earth was, shall we say, limited, he still tried to explain the things we observe within that model.
So he was still trying to come up with explanations for things like weather patterns and the seasons.
Exactly. For example, he theorized that the North and South have different temperatures because of the varying density of air and the Earth's weight tilting everything just so.
It's like he was trying to build a consistent, logical system based on what he could observe.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Even with limited knowledge, he was trying to make sense of the world in a systematic way.
That's actually pretty impressive.
I agree.
But how did he think we perceive this world made of atoms? Like, how do I see you right now in terms of atoms?
Ah, that's where things get even more interesting. Leucippus had this really interesting theory about perception.
Okay.
He believed that our senses work through a constant exchange of atoms.
A constant exchange. So, like, atoms are constantly flying off of things.
Exactly. Imagine that everything, including you and me, is constantly shedding these tiny films of atoms that somehow retain their shape.
So, like, little mini-me's made of atoms are flying off of me right now.
Right. And those mini-me atom films interact with the atoms of our soul.
Our soul. So he tied this into his theory of the soul as well.
Oh, yeah, it's all connected. According to Leucippus, when these films of atoms reach our eyes, they create a reflection, and that's how we see.
Wow, that's a very, I don't know, mechanical way to think about vision.
Well, yeah. Keep in mind they didn't have brain scans back then.
That's true. So sight, smells, sounds, it's all just atoms interacting with our soul.
Exactly. It's like this constant cosmic dance of atoms sending signals to our senses.
And this brings us to what I find most fascinating about Leucippus. He applied atomism to abstract concepts too.
Oh, absolutely. Things like justice or wisdom.
Wait, hold on. He thought you could explain things like justice and wisdom with atoms? How does that even work?
Well, he believed these abstract concepts were formed by special soul atoms arranging themselves in unique ways.
Soul atoms. Okay, this is getting really interesting.
Right. So, for example, the arrangement of soul atoms for bravery would be different from the arrangement for, say, patience.
So it's like a specific pattern of atoms creates a specific concept.
Precisely. A very bold idea, to say the least.
It is. It makes you wonder if, in a way, he was anticipating modern ideas about how our thoughts and emotions have a physical basis in the brain.
It's definitely a fascinating parallel.
So speaking of the soul, what exactly did Leucippus think the soul was made of? In terms of atoms, I mean.
He envisioned the soul as being made of spherical atoms that are constantly in motion.
Spherical atoms, always moving.
And this movement, he argued, was connected to everything. Breathing, thinking, even sleeping and dying.
It's almost like he was describing a tiny engine inside of us, constantly running and powering everything we do.
I love that analogy, and it really makes you wonder if he was, in some way, intuiting something about the concept of energy, even without the scientific framework we have today.
It's amazing how these ancient thinkers could come up with such profound ideas just by observing the world and using logic.
It really is. But remember that quote we talked about earlier? About nothing happening at random.
Nothing happens at random, but everything for a reason and by necessity.
Yeah.
I remember
But
too.
when you think about it, that idea is directly tied to his theory of atomism.
Because if everything is just atoms mechanically interacting in a predetermined way, then there's no room for randomness or chance.
Exactly. Free will becomes a big question, too.
It makes you wonder what Leucippus would think of modern science with all its talk of quantum mechanics and probability.
Right. If we could show him the evidence for quantum physics and how randomness seems to be built into the fabric of reality, would he stick to his deterministic view?
Or would he find a way to incorporate those new discoveries into his system? I guess we'll never know.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, though, and it really highlights how scientific knowledge is constantly evolving, always building upon past ideas, while also challenging and refining them.
Speaking of which, Leucippus's theory of atomism didn't exactly die out with him, did it?
Not at all. His ideas had a huge impact on later thinkers.
So tell me, how did his theory of atomism continue to influence scientific thought after his time?
It's amazing to think how Leucippus's ideas from way back in ancient Greece had such a lasting impact on science.
It really is. So walk us through how his atomism kept making waves through history.
Well, fast forward a few centuries to the Renaissance, and boom, atomism is back in a big way.
The Renaissance,
Yes.
the time of Da Vinci and Michelangelo. What was it about that era that brought atomism back into the spotlight?
It was a period of intense intellectual curiosity and rediscovery of classical knowledge.
Ah, so they were digging back into the works of ancient philosophers like Leucippus.
Exactly. Thinkers like Pierre Gassendi and Robert Boyle, who were key figures in the scientific revolution, drew inspiration from ancient atomism.
So Leucippus's ideas helped pave the way for the scientific revolution.
You could say that. And then, of course, we can't forget John Dalton,
John Dalton, the father of modern atomic theory.
the one and only. In the 19th century, he revolutionized chemistry with his atomic theory.
He's the one who finally figured out the specifics about different types of atoms and how they combine, right?
That's right. He built on the foundation laid by Leucippus, adding layers of experimental evidence and detail.
It's mind-blowing how an idea from so long ago could have such a ripple effect across centuries.
It really speaks to the enduring power of human curiosity and our drive to understand the world around us.
But it also makes you wonder, right?
About.
If Leucippus were alive today, what would he make of all the advances in science, especially in our understanding of the atom?
Oh, that's a great question. Imagine showing him what we now know about subatomic particles, quarks, all that quantum stuff.
Right. It's not just these simple indivisible atoms anymore.
Not at all. We've gone so far beyond what he could have imagined.
I mean, we've even learned that energy and matter are interchangeable. Remember that famous equation, EMC fork?
Einstein's masterpiece. Yeah, I think Leucippus would have a lot to grapple with.
I bet he'd be blown away.
But honestly, I think part of him would be absolutely thrilled.
Thrilled. Why do you say that?
Because he was such a bold thinker, always pushing the boundaries. I think he'd be excited to dive into all these new discoveries, to try and integrate them into his framework of atomism.
So maybe instead of being intimidated By modern physics, he'd see it as a challenge, a new puzzle to solve.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe he'd even find a way to reconcile his ideas with modern science.
Like, maybe he'd argue that these subatomic particles are just another layer of reality, still governed by the principles of atoms and void, but on an even smaller scale.
It's fun to speculate. But even if he didn't agree with everything, I think he'd admire the spirit of inquiry that drives modern science.
Because ultimately, it's that same spirit that drove him, right? That desire to understand the fundamental building blocks of reality.
Absolutely. And that's the real takeaway here, I think.
That the quest for knowledge is an ongoing journey, and we're all part of it.
Building on the work of those who came before us, just like Dalton built on the work of Leucippus.
And who knows what incredible discoveries are still waiting to be made, maybe even inspired by those ancient ideas. It's a pretty exciting thought.
It is. The universe is full of mysteries, just waiting to be unraveled.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the mind of Leucippus.
It's been a fascinating journey.
Huge thanks to you for guiding us through it.
My pleasure. Always happy to explore the world of ancient philosophy.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep exploring the universe around you.